to continue with the interview, Jose, I would like to ask you about, in your observation of all this work you have done over time, what have been the transformations you have noticed in terms of treatment?
You mean the differences from the time that I started?
Yes.
Well, of course, some of them I pointed out to you, for example, that in the early years, some things with the treatments without thinking whether it was needed or not. And, that's, for example, reprocessing, we did it automatically. Rewashing, mounting, those things have changed because one thing that I learned from Caroline Keck is she used to say the object makes its own demands. It's the object that tells you what you need to do. And the object means everything. The object means the integrity of the work as you find it now, the integrity of the work as the artist, the integrity of the object as far as within the context of a period of time in photographic history. Albumin prints, salted prints, platinum prints, and even gel. One of the things that I think we have always emphasized that photographers don't make good conservators. The reason they don't make good conservators is that they have an idea of what their contemporary work is. Their work is usually contrasted because people love contrast in their contemporary work. But you can't apply that to any other work. People like white mounts today, but white mounts don't work with albumin prints always. If you have to replace a mount, you need to choose a color that is sympathetic to that tone, not in contrast to the tone, but sympathetic. That kind of things have changed for the time, and that has been a very important thing. One thing I've always said to my students, if you come here and you learn from me, and all you do is replicate what you do, what I do, I failed you. You failed yourself. You only come here to get the basic feelings, and then you make your own choices, because ultimately you're the conservator in front of that, not me. Sometimes levels of treatment for how far to go. Do you try to remove every stain that is there, or stains that are acceptable without exposing the object to move them? That's again something that you have to decide. I can't decide for you. That's why I was telling you earlier that in terms of intensification, I make the choice. The dealer doesn't make the choice. The customer does. I make the choice because the treatment is so erratic, so extreme sometimes that it cannot be. I don't want to be responsible. I mean, I want to be the responsible party. I don't want to be responsible for your choice.
So you think also, as the field as a whole, has there levels of intervention have changed?
The amount of treatment. Oh yeah. Yeah. Perhaps for the worse. Because sometimes, like I said, there are some conservators who love art, and there are some conservators who love antiquity. Antiquity is not art. Antiquity is archaeology. What can be else art? But just because you want to allow things to look old, you destroy the intent of the but things have, even to this day, things have changed because some treatments, either myself or one of my students has discovered a way of treating things that I had not of. But that's the exciting part of the therapy. That's absolutely so exciting. Photography has the advantage that there's photographs on glass, there's photographs on paper, there's photographs on plastic, and there are photographs on metals, and so all of those things become part of your vocabulary. And so that there's no way that at that point in the early 70s could I have envisioned treatments for everything. There's just no way. But I did set the standards. Interesting enough, what Grant said to me the last time I was in Rochester, it's true, I never thought of that. What was it that I did? He said, Jose, what you did was to establish the field of the conservation of photographs as a profession. There was no way that I could write a definitive book on the conservation of photographs about every photograph and every possible treatment, everything, But I could say, here is the criteria that I'm going to use. Ethically, objectively, how I look at the object objectively, technically, and that kind of things. Those are criteria that I could develop, and those were the criteria that I followed.
I'm very interested in this part that you're saying when you establish the standards for the field. So you think that there are certain ethical standards or technical standards that can be applied to all photographs? Let's say.
Oh yeah.
Could you explain to me a little bit further?
Well,
which are
ethically, of course, that's a given, because that's not just to photographs, that's to the professional life. But and the other one was the one that I pointed out in terms of contrast. What contrast you achieve in a photograph. So that when I look at, for example, when I'm intensified, say at a room print, I don't want huge amounts of contrast, because that goes beyond what is respectful of the object. Respect for the object is just paramount. And the people who criticize, people who do intervention, don't really appreciate or understand how respectful we are of the object. And so, let me think through the rest of the afternoon. What other areas? There are many areas that I think are standards within the conservation of photographs. And that's what I was saying the other day. That, I mean, that when you take on your treatments as generational from painting to paper to photography, you do it a disservice. A photograph is different to a painting. A photograph is different to a print, and it has its own way in which the image or the design is created. And you have to then develop your treatment on the basis of that.
In the subject of transformation, I also wanted to ask you about condition. Do you think that the perception of how a photograph should look in terms of its condition has changed through time?
Well, it has changed again, I say, sometimes for the work. Like we were talking about that core problem, we're talking mounting or not mounting, and the problem that enhances when a photograph becomes a three-dimensional object because you don't want to mount it. There's no answer that can be applied to every photograph. So some photographs must be mounted. Some photographs should not be mounted just because they may not be how you got it and how the artist intended. In the case of the HF photographs, the reason why they were not mounted wasn't because he made an aesthetic choice. It was because they were that group of photographs, they were part of drawers full that he had of stock photographs that then you would buy from him and then you would mount them. He didn't mount everything automatically. He just waited for you to buy and then he would mount. To the point is that most of those photographs are mounted on a particular kind of paper, which is what we call French blue.
And for example, also in the same subject, the term patina has been applied to some photographs. Patina.
Patina.
So I would like to hear your comment on that.
Tell me what you think patina is.
Well, I think it's been a term that was created for paintings and then also applied for drawing.
And for silver.
But it has had several meanings to art history, and now it's been used for photographs. So
yes.
I'm curious to know, what do you think? If it's proper, if it's...
I think there's some photographs that have a certain patina. That can be applied, but if in order to save the photograph I have to get rid of that patina, then that is my first choice. In other words, the preservation of that object is the most important criteria that I then deal with. Now, if I can also save the patina, then that's fine. As long as it doesn't intrude into my visual contact with the print, as long as I can see, in some, particularly in gel and contemporary prints, the photographs in what we call between the wall photographs, often a very thin line, which is covered by just age, is no longer visible. And when you remove that, you see what are the delineations of the design. How far the design went, but you must remove that surface, either that acrylic fog or dirt or whatever, in order to do it. It was interesting to me when Gowan, you know who I mean Gowan. When Gowan came to me, I said, Gowan, we had a photograph that was really different. It didn't need to be bleached, it just needed to be washed. And washing in my case often means balanced alkali, because it removes just superficial acidity. And he says, wash? You put the photographs in water? I said, why won't I? He says, water will never let us. And I found that in Congress. I just find it so almost offensive, because you're not introducing any chemical that's going to stay there. You're just simply revealing, what is already there. In the case of the intensification, that's the extreme, the other way. But in the case of just washing, it doesn't work the same way.
Thank you, Jose. Changing a bit subject, I wanted to ask you about external influences of treatment, and by that I would like to ask you about market. do you think that market value or trends influence treatment approaches or treatment decision making?
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's amazing. There is a person who was a dealer, one of the first dealers of photographs, named Marjorie and Nycroft. Marjorie and Nycroft still with her. And one day we were talking about such a criteria. He says, and she said, wasn't it wonderful when we just loved photographs? You know. And in the same vein, I've had people come to me and bring me a photograph and say, isn't this beautiful? As if I was going to justify their buying it. Mm-hmm. I said, I can't tell you that. You have to determine that before you buy. Mm-hmm. You know, because if it's not beautiful to you, it's still not beautiful. You know, it may be beautiful to me, but and that's because the market makes a demand. You know, they want to make sure that their money is justified. Mm-hmm. The price of photographs has gone to such extreme. There were years. Oh boy. When I was at the Eastman House, they started weeding out some big collection, and Mr. Doherty put in a shopping cart original photographs by Louis Hine, Margaret Burke White, and the others. I could have bought the whole cart for 50 cents each photograph. And those photographs have now, I mean, there was one photograph that I bought, which was of the Empire State Building, the construction of the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. Years later, I needed the money and I sold it. Sold it for, I think, about $3,000. To me, it seemed, wow, $3,000. A year later, that same photograph was sold in auction for $70,000. See? And all of a sudden, the market changed. You know. The Zeppelin, mm-hmm. You know, and that's you know what I mean by Zeppelin, the Margaret Burke White photo. That is in the frame made of metal and that kind of thing. That photograph was almost worth nothing in those days. And yet, it was suddenly, it sold, I think, the first Zeppelin that I saw in the market sold for about $50,000. And then all of a sudden people realized that there were lots of Zeppelins. Mm-hmm. And people started trying to market their Zeppelins. And then all of a sudden the price went, oops! Not because it was beautiful, but because it had a dollar sign on it. Mm-hmm. See, that's why I don't go to the auctions anymore. I just can't take it. And I don't go to APAT either. I just can't take that kind of mentality, you know. Mm-hmm. I just love photographs, and there's no other way to explain it. Yeah.
And in terms of treatment, do you think that the treatment changes value of photograph?
No. There's some people who will tell you that. But I think in many cases the treatment enhances the value. But what happens is that the people who think enhances the value also think that it is important that the client not be told that it's been treated. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So often it was interesting. There used to be a very well-known, a dear friend of mine, mm-hmm. named Harry Lund. Harry Lund has huge collections of wonderful, wonderful photos. Many of which I got not stuck with, were left to me because he had a big flood in his apartment. And he stacked them up, all these photographs, uh, of great intrinsic value, but he wanted to take the insurance money rather than keep the photograph or have the photograph conserved. Where was I on that one?
Value, treatment changing value.
Oh, Harry used to come to me because at those days I was still already doing intensification. He used to come to me, he says, do anything you want, but don't tell me about it. See what? Intensify you want, but don't tell me about it, and don't write it down. I said, Harry, I can't do that. I can't. All my response is to give you a treatment report. What you do with a treatment report, that's your business. You know. And so, and that is because that has been. Now, it's not the same in painting. Isn't that interesting? In painting, a restored painting is much more valuable than an unrestored painting. You know, I just don't, but that's the way the market has gone. And in some ways, many of us who really love photography feel that the market has really hurt photography. You know. I mean, the fact is, and I must say honestly, that if it had not been for the market, I would not have developed my profession. Because when I started, no one would pay a penny to have a photograph restored. It was only when it started bringing prices, only the 1972, when it started, when the first auctions were held, that photographs started coming to me in huge numbers.
And now that we're talking about the market and value, do you think that the controversy about intensification in '85 had to do with changing the value?
Oh yeah. Well, changing the value.
The monetary value?
Yeah. It had nothing to do with, well, let me put it this way. It had nothing to do with the fact that an intensified print does look better than it had to do again with knowing whether the intensified and altered, whether that was the original or not the original. And that altered. So that's why Harry could say to me, don't tell me about it. It is going to raise the value, but don't tell me about it because then I'm responsible. You see what I mean? And that's, but intensification, I recognize to this day that it must have been very shocking for people to see a photograph that they had sold for $20 all of a sudden be worth $1,000 because the values were back. I love what that did. It shook them.
So now I would like to ask you some questions about training. And I will begin asking you, do you consider that treatment proficiency is central to the competences of a photograph conservator?
It's the only thing there is. It's the only thing there is. I mean, that's why we train curators as opposed to conservators. Curators are the people who should be involved in the storage and care of photographs. Of course, what makes conservators unique, I always tell curators that a conservator knows everything that relates to conservation, but also everything that relates to storage. So a conservator has much more information than a curator has, because that he must advise the curator into how to store, and what materials to store. When I first when we started dealing with mounts and buffered mounts and that kind of things, I said to these people, don't you know if you are stupid, don't you know that a photograph that has been buffered renders a gelatin photograph dangerous because it makes that photograph soluble. A photograph gelatin is hardened by the presence of acid. You must have a certain level of acidity in order for it to be stable. That never entered me, but that's the kind of things that I, as a conservator, know about storage and storage materials that, you know, other people. So you do need the information, but that is not your job. You know, you're there to advise the curator and or the keeper of collections or whatever you call it, but not to perform that because it's such a waste of time, a waste of good training. That's all you do. Yeah. And people who go to institutions and that's all they do, God, I say all those years wasted. You know.
So I know you have been teaching for many years. I would like to ask you, do you think that we can evaluate treatment proficiency?
Oh, yeah.
How?
Yeah. Well, we can evaluate for sure the student that comes. What are really the qualities that you yes, you want students who understand science, you know, but only a small amount of information is gained by science. What's gained the most is by connoisseurship. That's how you get the most. So you evaluate those things by finding what really meets the need of the object. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. My friend Don Severa, who taught with me in Delaware and then went to work at the Library of Congress as a chemist, used to say that it was really frustrating for him because all these people, conservators who worked there, would come to him with projects and they would say, can we test this or can we test this other thing? And he would ask them, he says, yes we can, but when you test it, then what are you going to do? I mean, how does that help your treatment, which is the ultimate thing?
So, I wanted to ask you something. Grant Romer says that he has heard you saying that there's 3 requisites for a photograph conservator. One is to know what not to do. The second is to know what to do once you've done what you shouldn't have done. And the third is to have the nerve to continue to do.
Yeah,
What is true? Did you say this?
Yeah. I mean, I was talking about that before, that you really, a coward conservator is the worst thing in the world. Because really, you know, because you're only dealing in the edges of chemistry. Often you don't know exactly how a photograph is going to react. In the first place, you don't know what a environment photograph has been. You don't know what kind of solutions it has been used. You don't know what environmental things and how all those things are going to affect your treatment. So that even though you speculate and you think, you may have a problem. And then when you have a problem, then what the hell do you do? You know? And it's very disrespectful to the object if you just say, well, let me give up. If conservators shall remain nameless, a friend of mine, student of mine, I sent him a photograph by Cortez of Martinique that had those little yellow marks in the surface. It's, I've forgotten what it's called, the condition. But he had developed an iodine treatment by which it could be removed. And he was sure that it worked in every way. And I said I didn't want to treat it because those chemicals are too toxic for me. And so I said to him, to this day, I know something has happened. He won't tell me what has happened. And just even last week, I said, I got to return it to my client, no matter what condition it is. It doesn't matter, I got to return it. You see, you can't always tell. What you think you get this business of using the iodine treatment and that's going to do it? Not always it's going to do it. And sometimes it can destroy a photograph, you know. I mean, like for example, as I was talking, the carbon prints. You know, I have owned myself a Muybridge negative. The Muybridge negative is not a negative; it's an internegative. Because the way Muybridge did it is that he would take photographs of the animals on glass. Then he would line all those onto a gelatin substrate and photograph it, and then print it again there, and that would be your negative. And it's very, very soft, very soft. And again, just like it happened with the carbon print, it just went crazy. Just went crazy. And again, I just had to coax it back into that kind of situation. The same thing happens with photographs that create bubbles. Oh, you bring so many memories. I had a student in Cooperstown. He brought me a photograph of, I mean, he was just the first year student, a photograph of one of his relatives. And it was a large photograph that normally would be called crayon enlargement, but in fact this was a gelatin photograph. It was just the same shape and the same tone. I said, I wouldn't treat it. It looks to me very, very soft. It looks to me like it's not going to take it, and we cannot harden it because it's on that curve. And I said, the condition is not really without objection. But he decided to treat it. I was home and all of a sudden I got a call. Jose, come help me. And what is this bubbles I created? Water bubbles, air bubbles, you know, not in one place, but just like this big. And he was in tears, he was crying and crying. Well, I said that Paul, this is a different Paul, this is Paul Hanger. I said, we can still do it, we can do something, but you gotta do it gently. And I said, take small, tiny pieces of blotters, and let's start by putting not on the edges, but on the center a little bit, tap it down, and then move that way, and then move that way until you have dried that bubble and it has come to the original size and it fits there. But if you go like this and try to smooth the whole thing, you would have created this black line all around the edges. So again, it's those kind of things that you have to know a multitude of little tricks, you know, on it in order to be able to do it.
And these expression you used, you have to have the nerve to continue to do.
Oh,
do you think that's something we are born with? We learn, or
no, it's not a learned thing. It's not a learned thing. It's born partly out of respect for the object, but you do have to have the courage to proceed, you know. If anything, out of self-respect. How could you let a photograph overcome you? You know, when the answers should be in your head. And if they're not in your head, then you don't need to even start reading. You know, so when you, this I forgot about this. I used to think of this all the time. There's several things that I had hidden in places where I've written. I wanted to say somebody will discover and put it all together to a book. A photographer's mind is like a computer. There's all this information here, and if you put in Google gelatin print, it's going to give you all these possibilities that should be popping into your mind at that moment. And then you look into the object and look at that piece of information that is already in your mind, and you can make the choice. You can make the right choice. See, but you have to have that multitude of, a computer is filled with, when you think about Google, I don't see how to get that much information in those little chips, but it's just amazing. But it should be that way.
Jose, to end up the interview, I'd like to ask you, in terms of treatment, what do you think are the major challenges that the field faces?
I would say really that color presents the most important challenge. Tint types are a great difficulty, but tint types are not worth much money. And because everything is judged by money in conservation, you have to say color. When I first started in conservation, there was no museum worth its soul that collected color. You could not sell a color photograph to a museum. As it's developed, more, and now, major collections are in color. Really important stuff. And yet, you are dealing with an emulsion that is a multi-color emulsion, and how one layer of color modifies the one below it and the one below it, and it's just amazing. It's so complex that it's just beyond me. I don't want to deal with it. I've done my contributions, I will not do that. And so I would say that color is where the most research ought to be done. Sometimes, for example, treatments that I could do in the black and white photos, I cannot do in color. I cannot use ammonium to clean the surface of the color photo. You change the color.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. If you use water in a sebachrome, it becomes a different texture completely. Becomes actually, because the gelatin is so soft. If you try to, I try to intensify a color photograph. It looks awful. Because you're only intensifying one layer. What is really fading is not the black and white emulsion, it's the color. And so what you're doing is making a very dark photograph. I tried this a number of times because it's kind of fun. So color presents challenges that I think are incredible. And of course, to me, color presents a real challenge to the manufacturing business, to create color images that are stable. I could have shown you over there, I had up there a lantern slide, an early color lantern slide, very early. And it's just, it was pieces of cellophane, different colors of cellophane sandwiched together. It's an incredible image, but if you try to treat it, those layers separate.
So it's a complex object.
Oh, wow, it's so complex. And again, I think that you take for example the Sherman photographs that bring tremendous amount of money. They're gonna one of these days start showing damage, and then what are they gonna do? It's interesting what I said before that what works for black and white doesn't work for color, and there are many things. There was, and this is a little it relates to photography. Microfilm. When I started, that was the beginning of microfilm era, in which people would say microfilm all your documents and throw away the originals. But microfilm started fading. Not only fading, but interesting enough, people would put them on metal shelves that would rust. And this metal and this rust altered the image. I remember in those days, in those long days ago, trying to help the Mormon church with their archives, because I don't know if you know anything about Mormons, but part of their religion is that they go to all the a town like Sharon, Connecticut, and they look at all their birth records, and that that you can after the fact baptize these people, quote baptize them, and make them Mormons even when they're dead, by maintaining their records. Yeah. But they did all those on that. They would copy these things, and the early copying machine, which was like a wet copy, it was like you would get a paper that had a wet kind of process, and all of those faded. Now, one of my great joys is that I was able to intensify
this.
So you can't take everything the same way. Each of those objects has different color, absolutely. Color, absolutely. And we're going to really be in trouble. It's my feeling with color.
Do you think this extends to digital printing technique?
Yeah, absolutely. This several of us have talked about it. In the first place, you know that people like Grant Romer, people that I don't think that a digital photograph is a photograph. That's a bunch of bullshit. Anything that is created by light is a photograph. But in digital printing, absolutely. No one took the time to look at those colors and the way that it made. Even to the surface of the support. So I think pretty soon we're gonna have the same thing. It happened the same way with negatives. People just don't think ahead of time. Perspective is one of the most important characteristics that a conservator should have. They happen with negatives. When I first came to the Eastern House, I was sent by the Brooklyn Museum all these negatives that had all these little bubbles. And they were created on diacetyl. And as you know, often the diacetyl is not as stable as triacetate, but it's stable enough. But why the bubbles? That's because they use nitrate as the adhesive between the two layers, and those things bubble, and what you see is the fumes of it. No one thought about it. When they created an image that they thought was totally perfect. What was most permanent was the glass negatives that we don't use anymore. So that all of those things in developing the tree as to what you can treat, how things are going to deteriorate, you need to know that in advance. And I think color has not been yet defined that way. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. I really appreciate your time and your interest in the family meeting.
Thank you very, very much, Angel.